But although they had been in the air for 9.5 days, they had only travelled just over 5,000 miles. All the other teams had failed miserably. Uliassi and Rutan's balloons had exploded in mid-air soon after takeoff. Meanwhile, Richard Branson and Per Lindstrand's balloon had been ripped from the launch site by a freak gust of wind prior to takeoff. Fossett now radically changed his strategy.
It is a competition, and that is one of the considerations coming to the Southern Hemisphere, because I felt we were prepared to take on the Southern Hemisphere, and the other teams were not.
I take my hat off to him. I mean, he is a competitive son of a bitch, and he thought, let's leapfrog everybody else and let's go for it.
Fossett had chosen to take off near the Andes to fly east over the southern Atlantic in a balloon large enough to carry 50% more fuel.
Well, my previous two flights, I'd been plagued by flight permission problems in the Northern Hemisphere, especially the Islamic countries. And so that's totally eliminated, because there's only 5 possible countries that I would cross in the Southern Hemisphere. The rest of it's water. This is where you will discover a lot of equipment problems, if you have them. I'm nervous until I get up to flight altitude.
Almost immediately, the balloon had problems. Fossett's burners started to fail.
Cam, do you copy on this frequency, over?
Yeah, I do, Steve. This launch out of here was fantastic. Right now we're monitoring you, and it looks beautiful.
Burner 1 is erratic. Number 2 is also not firing regularly. 3 and 4 fire regularly.
With the mixture of ethane and propane...
With only 2 burners still functioning, it was an unnerving start to the flight. As dawn approached, Fossett tried to fix the faulty burners, but managed to dislodge a fuel hose. Flames engulfed the capsule.
I had a big fire in my hand with high-pressure propane flames shooting out, plus the spilled propane that I had around. So I was just stuck holding this thing, kind of pointing it away from my equipment while this burning is going on, and my sleeves and gloves are on fire as well. The problem was solved by finding the proper tank which was feeding these hoses, and got that turned off.
Fortunately, I was pretty well covered. I was wearing the oxygen mask and gloves. There was a space on my wrist that I got a little bit of a burn blister and needed to put a dressing on that. A little bit of almost kind of a sunburn on the side of my face, burned off my left eyebrow.
If I'd burned through another propane hose, I would have had an totally out of control fire. So it was a very dangerous situation.
Despite the fire, Fossett flew on.
The decision to go for it was really made when I left the coast of Argentina. I'm not sure I'm going to be over land again before I finish around the world. So this is a go.
He's been through Friday night.
The winds that were carrying Fossett were veering north. His control centre had been advising him on how he should fix his burners.
Because he had to use some under the cloud layer, I would assume, yesterday.
Takes about 1.5 burners to keep the balloon aloft at night. I was really worried earlier on. I was down to 1 burner at one time, then we discovered the problem, and so I'm up with 3 burners, so that's no longer a problem.
But there was a new problem. He was using much more fuel than expected.
I was burning far too much fuel during the first 2 nights of the flight. This became a concern as to whether or not I'd have enough to make it all the way around the world.
Fossett had climbed much higher than he had originally intended. Breathing oxygen, he flew at 29,000 feet to catch winds that would carry him across the Atlantic. Despite all the early difficulties, he managed to steer the balloon towards South Africa.
Once I got beyond those first 2 days, my fuel consumption fell right into line of the original expectations. I suspect it has something to do with an overladen balloon system during the first day or two of flight.
Well, I'm nearing a very important juncture of this flight. In only a couple hundred miles, I'll pass Cape Town, and this will mark the first balloon crossing of the South Atlantic.
I was within 30 miles of Cape Town, so I got a good view of Cape Town that night when I flew by. There were approximately 50 UFO sightings in South Africa when I flew by, so I thought that was pretty funny.
Fossett had crossed the southern Atlantic in just 3 days.
There was a point where Steve had really thrown in the towel. He told us to let the news media know that he probably wouldn't even make it to Australia, and wanted to make plans for looping in the high, which is a process that takes days and days. He might not make it to land at all. He was completely demoralized.
The fact that I was going slow wasn't what was bothering me. What was bothering me was the very real possibility that I was being captured by the high pressure area and would have no escape from that. And I wasn't sure whether we had a good game plan to escape the high pressure area.
We could see ahead that he had high-level winds blowing out of the west, and so we just had him poke his head up occasionally until he found those winds, and when he found them, he took like a right turn, almost 90 degrees immediately, and took off lickety-split for Australia.
My spirits go exactly with the prospects of success of this flight. Things were looking bad there in the Indian Ocean. Now they look good, so I'm in very good spirits. I fully expect to make it to Australia, New Zealand. I've been staying on oxygen enough, and I only have to go on it when I'm exercising or, just to kind of catch up.
En route to Australia, Fossett broke his own distance record. He'd now flown 13,500 miles, well over halfway round the world.
Well, I'm really happy to get these records, especially the absolute world distance record. It means the flight will be a success in any event, but I also remember what we're really here for, and that's to make the entire round-the-world flight.
Visibility over Australia was very clear, just a few clouds here and there, so it was sensational viewing. This was a fast jet stream going across Australia. And it's a real pleasure flying over a continental area. I spent a lot of time looking out at the deserts and the dry lakes, the features on the ground in Australia.
This is a beautiful sunrise, and looking at, I think some salt lakes down below me, and I'm certainly in the desert here in Australia.
He got to the far coast of Australia like a half a day faster than projections. He was in the core of a jet that wasn't predicted on any weather map. He went right over a weather station that had sent a balloon up, and the highest reading they got all the way up was about 65 knots. He went over that weather station doing about 115 knots.
As I was approaching the eastern coast of Australia, there was some thunderstorm buildup in the coastal mountains. I flew over one thunderstorm just 1,000 feet over the top of it. And then I was also hearing that there's a line of thunderstorms out in the Pacific.
Fossett was now facing a flight across the widest point of the largest ocean in the world. If he made it, he would be the first to fly around the Earth by balloon.
I never even considered whether to land in Australia. It was just a given that I was going for it.
I'll be very proud if I can do it, and I'll be very satisfied with my accomplishment for the rest of my life.
The contrast if the balloon could make it back to South America.
What's this?
Fuel is good. Food and water are good. Oxygen's low.
I'm hoping that I could continue to fly at 20,000 feet even after the oxygen supply runs out. And 20,000 feet is still good enough for me to make it to the South American coast.
We all felt very confident that we could put him from Australia to South America in 3 days in the jet. It was sort of in the bag.
Every square inch of ocean has some country responsible for it. Will be coming through.
The team's main fear would be a mid-Pacific ditch. It could be days before Fossett would be picked up.
Unfortunately, there isn't very good rescue capability out in the middle of oceans, and I'm pretty far off the shipping routes. My Mission Control Center does stay in touch with the rescue control centers and would work out a plan, and but we hope we don't have to resort to that.
Everybody thought that he probably had it made. All we could see, as far ahead as we could see, was just open field running. There was just really no threats.
Fossett crossed the Australian coast at 8:22 p.m. local time. His next expected landfall was Chile, 7,500 miles away.
Yeah, he's about 490 miles east-northeast of the coast now. He is approaching and probably over an area of some convective activity.
In fact, Fossett was flying into a massive thunderstorm.
The last position report that was due didn't come through, and they've been coming through regularly. I think there's a high probability this is not just an accidental trip.
Not we're too worried about picking him up, I'm more worried about him.
With good reason. Fossett was in a dire emergency.
In my past experience, so long as I was clearing the thunderstorm, clearing the top of the cloud, that was sufficient. The first indication of problem came when the balloon entered a descent of 500 feet a minute. Then it reversed and it went to about 1,000 foot a minute climb. And then it reversed again. And at that point, I believe the balloon ruptured because I went into a very rapid descent. The balloon was really being thrown from side to side. I was burning heavily, and then there was just waves of hail. Had the burners on full blast, and so it was burning parts of the balloon. So it was really a vision of hell. At that point, I said softly out loud, "I'm going to die." In the last minute, I went out, I cut loose about 6 tanks, which is 1,500 pounds of weight. Still, the balloon was sinking at 2,500 foot a minute descent. So then I laid down on my back to take the impact, just watched the altimeter as it zinged through. And then I think I must have been knocked out.
Fossett had triggered emergency satellite beacons, which emit internationally recognized distress signals during his descent. But even these had now stopped.
Okay. It was obvious that there was a thunderstorm of great magnitude in that area. And instantly we believed that he was sucked into it with a possible lightning strike.
If he bailed out without even being able to get a survival suit, of course, then, we're in a long shot scenario. But he's got a survival suit. If he bailed out with that, then we're in only a desperate scenario. The closest merchant ship's a long way away. All the appropriate authorities know what's going on, and they're regarding this as the real thing, not as a phony. They've got all the data.
A search and rescue team waited for first light to take off.
Steve's a man with incredible internal fortitude, that he can do whatever he sets his mind to do. And I believe in that, but at the same time, Mother Nature has some awfully strong forces.
You just try to get a plane on the scene as fast as you can, because if he's still alive when it gets there, then they'll drop the life raft provisions and so on. The problem is these things take hours and hours to get there, and if you're floating in the ocean without a survival suit, then it would have been pretty tough to survive that long.
Two hours after dawn, the balloon was spotted. The capsule, with its propane tanks attached, was still floating. The balloon itself was just under the surface. There was no sign of a life raft.